Hello, welcome to Recap Rhapsody. Today, I'd like show you a psychological crime thriller film, Rope, released in 1948, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The film is notable for its unique cinematography style, with the story being told in what appears to be one continuous shot, with the camera never cutting away from the action. The film is loosely based on the real-life Leopold and Loeb murder case, which shocked the nation in the 1920s. The film follows a dinner party hosted by Philip Morgan and Brandon Shaw. All seems normal, except one thing. They killed David Kentley and used the chest containing David's body as a buffet table. As the film begins, Brandon and Philip, roommates, conspire to strangle a mutual acquaintance named David Kentley. The murder is committed with a simple piece of rope. They store the corpse in a simple luggage trunk used to hold rare books. Later that evening, they will take the body up to Connecticut and take a short vacation. But before they leave town, they will invite David's family, girlfriend, former best friend, and housemaster from prep school over to have a dinner party centered around the trunk. The boys share a toast to committing the perfect murder. With all the evidence hidden away, including David's body, they prepare for the dinner. The housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, arrives and begins helping them prepare just in time for the guests to begin pouring in. The first to arrive is Kenneth, David's former best friend, and the ex-boyfriend of David's current girlfriend, Janet. Then, Mr. Kentley, David's father, arrives along with David's aunt, a horoscope-reading British woman named Mrs. Atwater. When Mrs. Atwater first meets Kenneth, she confuses him with David, a misidentification which causes the nervous Philip to break a glass in his hand. Then, Janet, David's current girlfriend, arrives and greets the other guests. The last to arrive is Rupert Cordale, the boys' former housemaster, whom Brandon and Philip think of as having inspired the murder. To begin with, he is the one who taught them about the Nietzschean concept of Übermenschen or Superman. After Cordale arrives, the guests sit down to eat. Philip decides not to eat the chicken. Much to everyone's surprise, vegetarianism does not fly with this set. Brandon explains that Philip once had a job choking chickens, and on one memorable occasion, a chicken that he had choked came back to life on the dinner table. Philip vehemently denies such a story, but Cordale seems confused, as he knows the story to be true. Then, Cordale begins a discussion of what he sees as the perfect murder, a lesson that clearly left a big impression on his impressionable young pupils. Murder, according to him, is an art, one which should remain in the exclusive domain of those superior enough to know how and when it should be utilized. Mr. Kentley, clearly offended, is moved to inquire how the superiority of those charged with such responsibility is to be decided. Kentley recognizes Brandon's response as sympathetic to the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, whom, he points out, was also an influence on Hitler. Kentley is rattled by what he sees as an exceedingly irreverent and dangerous conversation and leaves the room. Confidentially, Rupert asks Brandon if he is planning on committing a murder, but Brandon blithely deflects his inquiry. As the party continues, Mr. Kentley becomes more and more concerned about David's unexplained tardiness. Meanwhile, in the absence of David, Brandon appears to be trying to manipulate Janet and Kenneth back into a romantic dyad. As the evening progresses, Philip drinks heavily. He is clearly anxious. When Brandon goes so far as to tie up a bundle of books for Mr. Kentley with the rope that they used to kill David, Philip becomes overwhelmed with nervousness. Rupert Cardale notices the unusual behavior of his two former students and is compelled to question Philip about David's potential whereabouts. Philip tells him he doesn't know, but Rupert becomes more and more suspicious. Rupert suddenly begins a concerted effort to track down the whereabouts of the still missing David. When Mrs. Kentley calls to report that David is not home, everybody starts to take their leave. When Cardale goes to leave, Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper, hands him the wrong hat, and as he takes it off, he notices the initials DK inside for David Kentley. He leaves, looking suspicious and anxious. After everyone leaves, Brandon and Philip argue. Philip has gotten exceedingly drunk and feels certain that they will get caught. They are interrupted suddenly by the return of Cardale, who claims to have misplaced his cigarette case. We see Cardale place the cigarette case on the table out of sight of Brandon and Philip, revealing to the audience that the missing case was just a ruse to get back in the apartment. After Brandon offers Cardale a drink, Cardale muses on the mystery of David Kentley's disappearance, even going so far as to describe a hypothetical murder. Cardale is alarmed to notice that Brandon is holding a gun in his pocket, but when he points it out, Brandon laughs it off, suggesting that he is bringing it to Connecticut for protection. After Brandon puts the gun on the table, Cardale casually takes the murderous piece of rope out his pocket, suggesting to the boys that he knows they killed David. As Cardale absently plays with the rope, Philip finally loses his last remaining grip and bursts into hysterical ramblings. Finally, Cardale discovers David's dead body in the trunk and scolds the boys for twisting his philosophical investment in Nietzsche into an amoral excuse for the murder of an innocent peer. Cardale then walks to window, fires a gun into the air, and turns to wait with Brandon and Philip for the police to arrive. As the police arrive, Rupert sits on a chair next to the chest. Philip begins to play the piano, and Brandon continues to drink. Video is over now. Thanks for watching.